Hi there, I'm John Ivison and welcome to our level-headed guide to the week in politics. I'm joined as usual by Marcella and Munro, who is the owner-operator of WPM Public Affairs, and Andrew Balfour, who is the managing partner of Rubicon Strategies. So this week we're going to have a chat about who is the biggest threat to Justin Trudeau's ambitions. Is it Erin O'Toole or is it Jagmeet Singh? We'll dip into the Shakespearean tragedy that is unfolding in the Green Party. And we'll look at the race that's unfolding between vaccination rates and the Delta variant of COVID, which seems to be gaining some traction across the country. OK, so all signs point to an election, not least of which is the farewell speeches in the House of Commons by MPs who are not seeking re-election. Senior Liberals are talking about this being a historic election. The idea that they could possibly, in their eyes, bury the Conservative Party for a generation if Trudeau wins his majority back. And I have some sympathy with that view. I think the official opposition would really have to do a root and branch re-evaluation if Trudeau were to win a majority again. But while Erin O'Toole is trying to attack Justin Trudeau's competence and doesn't seem to be making many inroads, Jagmeet Singh is attacking his compassion and pointing out that he is the real caring heart of Canadian progressivism. So, looking at that, I mean, the NDP numbers are pretty buoyant, Marcella. I like my coffee black and my government's capable, but most people, it seems, the thing that they're really looking for is a government that's going to make them feel secure. And while Trudeau is forced to make hard choices as he's governing, Jagmeet Singh can go around the country promising the earth and apparently doing okay with voters. What do you think?
I mean, I think it's so we know that those numbers are buoyant. We also know that they're very regionalized, right? So Jagmeet Singh is going to, I think, could do quite well in places like British Columbia and presumably some of the Toronto postal codes. But here's the problem, and I agree. He's very good at being emotive, and I think right now, post-COVID, as the recovery is starting, but people still are quite anxious. If you look at the polling numbers, then there's an opening there for Jagmeet because he is, I think, more emotive, more empathetic. And he isn't carrying the burden of a lot of the issues that Trudeau's carrying the burden on, whether it's what's happened with the Defense Department, whether it's, starting to try and really reckon with Indigenous rights in this country and reconciliation. So he can take the high road on those issues and be that face. But I think they've still got, he's still got a fairly big challenge because if you look at Quebec, for instance, where the NDP would have to do very well to sort of make the kind of comeback that they had under Jack Layton. You can see that actually the riskier thing for Trudeau in Quebec is actually Erin O'Toole right now, who recent polling suggests could pull votes away from the Bloc. So it's a regional. We know Canada's a group of regions, and that will come into play in terms of who Trudeau gets challenged by.
The T sympathy and taxpayer money tactic, which Singh's adopting, seems to be going down particularly well with women. And I was kind of shocked by an Abacus data poll today, which said that Singh is far outpolling Justin Trudeau among women under 44.
How many of those women under 44 show up and vote? It's the same thing when you look at it that, Singh's doing super well in the under 35 vote, but I mean, their turnout numbers aren't the best. So I think that's a problem too.
But I mean, I'm not suggesting that Singh's going to have a runaway success and be Prime Minister, but he could be a spoiler.
That's part of the CPC's calculation. They need Singh to do a lot better.
That also relies on a bump for O'Toole, and there is no sign of that. Andrew?
Well, I've been saying this for a long time. I think that Erin O'Toole will come back with fewer seats than he has right now. He could very well end up being the Michael Ignatieff of the Conservative Party, and if that is the case, then to your earlier point, they will be in a big bad spot, and maybe next time they'll have a bunch of serious people who want to run for leader. They've gone through 2 leaderships where the outcome led them to have these people. So I don't think that Erin O'Toole has a lot of pickups out there. I agree with Marcella that Jagmeet could do well in certain regions, but those aren't regions that have lots of seats because they're not Ontario and Quebec.
One thing about the Conservatives, I think that the overall strategy about moving kind of centre-right and bringing in, although he denies it's a carbon tax, it really is a carbon pricing scheme. That overall strategy seems to me to be fine, but there have been a whole bunch of tactical errors all along the way that maybe we notice and other people don't. But, for example, when the sexual misconduct in the military thing hit, they wanted the head of Katie Telford, the Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, who was tangentially related to an issue which was clearly the responsibility of the Minister of Defence. And yet it's only laterally in the last week or so that they've started saying we want Sagen to step down. It just seems to me that there's a lot of inexperience and some really questionable decisions made, Marcella.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that. We talked about it before, and I said that I thought it was silly to be targeting Katie Telford when that's, not your opponent. Look, I think we all know, and this is widely known in political circles, that there's a real struggle for the hearts and minds of the Conservative Party going on inside that tent. And so that, to me, is in some ways Erin O'Toole's biggest challenge, right? Because he's trying to talk social conservatives into giving him a chance by, to your point, tacking to the center-right. There are groups of social conservatives in Alberta that won't like that whatsoever, and in British Columbia. He can stand to lose a bunch of those votes and probably still, win most of those seats. But does the center hold? And if there's this ongoing angst and internal kind of squabbling going on within the Conservative Party, I think that's where you're seeing, they will have a decent message one day and then the next day they've changed the channel to something that seems a bit ridiculous. That's part of, I think, what's going on there. And it could be, to Andrew's point, much to Mr. O'Toole's detriment.
Okay.
Well, and but one quick thing, John, is, you made the point about, they're moving this motion to have Sagen step down. I mean, did they have polling that shows that Canadians know who Sagen is or care whether he's there? Like, what is prompting them to do this? It makes no sense to me. When I watched the press conference, I was just sitting there, like, befuddled because I didn't have a clue what was happening.
Well, I think they're clutching at straws right now. Meanwhile, we were talking, Marcella, about the NDP being liberals in a hurry. That old description. It seems to be that Jagmeet Singh's like Usain Bolt when it comes to progressivism. The amount of money he spends has no end to it.
World champion.
Let's move on to the Green Party. I talked about it being a Shakespearean tragedy. Actually, the thing in popular culture that it resonated with me was more the life of Brian, the Judean People's Front crack suicide squad that came down from the hills and then did away with themselves. I mean, there does seem to be a complete lack of understanding about politics here. You've got a brand new leader. Obviously, there are divisions. I mean, she was only elected by less than half of the party membership, but those wounds have clearly not healed. What's wrong there, Andrew? I mean, what's behind it all?
Well, I mean, if you watched her press conference where she went after the Prime Minister, I think the first thing that kind of jumped out at me is it doesn't seem to me that the Prime Minister is responsible for her having a seat in Parliament. Quite the opposite. And I've said this before, like, she can't manage a party of 3 people, now only 2 people, and her internal, like, it's almost like she's like got the old school Liberal Party going on where the internal machinations are out to kill you. Like, what are these people like clawing at the like wheels of power that they're never going to have? It makes a very little
right. Well,
sense.
I mean, at least in the Liberal Party, there was it was vicious because there was a prize at stake, whereas here the stakes are pretty low. I mean, it can't have helped having Liz May in the background like Banquo's ghost, Marcella.
No, I don't think it does. Look, I don't disagree with anything Andrew said, but I would add there's another dimension to this. I do think we're seeing some signs that there's some serious, probably racist stuff that's coming from some parts of the Green Party. They don't seem to have hesitated to undermine this leader who they, announced with some great flourish to say, look at how progressive we are. We've got the first black woman Jewish leader in the country. I mean, I think that could have been a very good, story for them, except for the fact they've now completely undermined her. And I also feel like, to your point about Elizabeth May, I don't understand why she stepped down from being leader if she's kind of insisting, in my view, of trying to pull the strings, right? She still wants it her way or the highway, and I think that's a very big challenge.
I mean, it would have surely been a good idea for her to step down as an MP too if she didn't want to be leader anymore, and open that seat up for Annamie Paul.
I don't think that the people in the Green Party should ever point a finger at Elizabeth May. I don't think that any of us should. I don't think that their party would be in a spot right now where we'd even be paying attention to them unless she had spent, whatever it is, the last 15 years of her life fighting to make them relevant. And I also don't think that this leader they have right now deserves the media play she's getting right now, because she's never going to have a seat. She's never going to be a member of Parliament because she made a foolish decision to run in a seat that the Green Party can never win.
I agree with that, for sure.
So,
I will take you on that, though, because you have to point some finger at Elizabeth May on this. She clearly, she did do a hero's job in terms of building that party, and that's fine. But when it's time to move on, you need to move on, and that means you have to let the new leader lead. And if you're not prepared to do that, then is your commitment to yourself or to the party?
Good point.
well,
Okay.
She's still the parliamentary leader.
Let's move on to last 5 minutes to look at vaccines. Now, Canada's been a move from laggard to front runner in vaccines. When out 65% have had their first shot, 15% fully vaccinated. That's 30 million doses, which is
including you as of the other day.
I'm now double vaxxed. But we can look to the UK as a bit of a crystal ball the whole way along the line when it came to third wave, and I think now as well. Their restrictions are being lifted a lot more slowly because of the spread of this Delta variant, which has increased the prevalence of cases by about 50% in recent weeks. What do we think? Are we still on track to loosen restrictions at the border? Are vaccines going to win out in the race against this variant? Andrew, start with you. You're most fixated on this because you want to go somewhere.
Just saw,
anywhere.
Yeah, I desperately want to go places. But we saw this week, America gave us another 1 million shots of Moderna. That's helpful. But the bigger problem is that we still have all this hesitancy in this country. And in our weekly race for who's the dumbest province, we now have to bribe people to take the vaccine. So as long as that slows down, we'll see what happens. But I think we're moving in the right direction. And I think that you're absolutely bang on that using the UK as like a crystal ball, they've been kind of 2-3 months ahead of us the whole time. So just looking at what's happening there kind of probably tells us that we will likely have some kind of a fourth wave at some point in time. It probably just won't involve ERs and ICUs being overrun. It'll just, in the UK, they're expecting a doubling rate every 7 days now.
Yeah,
it's not great.
What about you, Marcella? Are you optimistic, or do you think we've still got some ways to go?
I think we've still got a ways to go. Here's what I'm very worried about, right? We're seeing in Toronto, for example, where the rollout of a lot of people getting their second vaccine, it's the same postal codes that were so successful getting it done the first time, i.e. the richest postal codes in the city, that have had the highest uptake rate. And we're still struggling in some of the harder hit areas of the city where the variant's much more likely to take hold to get the shot, right? They're still having to line up for hours at walk-in clinics. They're now having to squabble in different lines to figure out who's going to get the ticket and who's not. So I'm very concerned about what this will mean for the areas that were already harder hit. We're talking about, real working class neighborhoods, a lot of racialized people who have already paid a huge price during this pandemic. And it seems to me that we should be doing more to make sure they get their second shot, as fast as possible. I've had a first shot. I could have joined this Hunger Games thing that a lot of my friends were doing, and I'm not dissing anyone who went out and made sure they got the second shot right away. But I also know that I'm relatively safe. I live alone. I work from home. You know, am I really the priority? So I think that that's part of the challenge.
Okay. Well, as long as it doesn't interfere with the final of the Euro 2020, when Scotland will be playing, hopefully against England again. Big game tomorrow. Thanks again, everybody. We'll speak to you again next week. We may end up winding up the whole series for the summer next week.